So welcome to this episode of Positive Takes. Usually I use this channel to promote something that I think the media has underhyped or for whatever reason that people aren't considering the way for the qualities that I think they should be. This episode I'm actually going to do the complete opposite because I watched the film Titanic yesterday from 1997, and I think the main problem with this movie is it's not very good. Um, so I'm actually not going to be that positive. I'm going to be pretty negative. So I think James Cameron is quite a good director. Obviously there's been horror stories of how he is on set, very tyrannical and perfectionist and all that, and expects that from everyone else. I think famously on Aliens, he got mad at the British team for, taking tea time and all that. He wanted them to just keep working. But whatever, that's his personal life. So I'm actually a pretty big fan of most of James Cameron's other movies. I think Terminator and Terminator 2 are some of the best sci-fi and action movies ever made. Aliens is a really good follow-up to Alien. That might be even slightly better, I'm not sure. That's one of the rare sequels that is as good as the original. And I think even the first Avatar was, of course, had groundbreaking special effects. And then Avatar 2, I think, is actually pretty good, both story-wise and in terms of effects. I didn't think the first Avatar had a very good story. But in any case, and I haven't really seen The Abyss, though True Lies is also pretty good, even though it hasn't aged very well. It's very dated. So my problem with Titanic is that it kind of feels like two movies smushed together. The first one, this kind of, in my opinion, insipid, facile, very obvious romance between our two leads, Jack and Rose, and the other one being this like big, spectacular disaster film. And of those two films, I think the big, spectacular disaster film is, I think, what everyone involved with the film had more passion for, other than the lead actors. Um, so it's also kind of strange when you're talking about a movie and the best part of the movie is when a bunch of people start dying, especially considering that those people actually died in real life. It'd be one thing if it was like the Poseidon Adventure, where it's like fictional, but trying to do the same thing. Clearly, probably referring to the Titanic disaster. But in this case, it kind of, at least for me, leaves a bad taste in my mouth when you're thinking like this is actually real tragedy that they're depicting, and not in like making you want to feel it, or trying to depict the horrors of war or like any of those Holocaust films or anything like that, but just like this is some spectacle for you. So I feel like that's a little distasteful. And then, again, the actual love story. I will say I feel like James Cameron actually has a pretty good handle on romance in film. Even films like The Terminator, the first one, and Avatar, they all portray a pretty good depiction of what it's like to actually fall in love with someone. So I'll say, he's actually pretty good at that. However, when you're asking the audience to continue caring about these two charismatic leads, even as this ship is like breaking in two and all like hundreds of people are dying in mass, I feel like it's pretty silly, and again a little bit disrespectful, maybe even like a little rude to the audience, like kind of insulting everyone's intelligence in a way. But we'll talk about more of that in a bit. So the first half of this film, we're kind of setting things up, and especially if you see some of the deleted scenes, I don't think this uh, you know, um, I don't think the surrounding story is very good of Bill Paxton and his team of like grubby science nerds trying to find the ruins of the Titanic and like find the heart of the ocean diamond. I feel like that stuff's all pretty silly, and again, there's some deleted scenes that makes all that stuff even worse. That you can find, an alternate ending and stuff like that. That's really bad. So you see that Cameron at least has some quality control. He does edit out some stuff when he's like, okay, this isn't working. So that's all good. But that's barely, much of the movie. It's just like a few narrative interludes of the old woman reminiscing of her past. The main thing is the mystery of like, what is this drawing and what is this diamond and why is it all so important? Um, so then we have this like, really long flashback, which is the meat of the movie. And again, you can kind of see this production in two ways. Again, on the one hand, it's like this really detailed recreation of the past of this era that's like before any of us were born, and this like giant ship that is impossible to imagine, and like there was actually a twin sister ship, the Queen Mary, that actually did make a bunch of successful voyages, and is now docked in LA. That's supposedly super haunted. But anyway, just to bring this era and these people and these particular mannerisms to life is obviously a ton of work. Again, you can think of like the Star Wars films or any of those things, or the Lord of the Rings films, where like just doing the behind the scenes stuff must have been like such backbreaking work to bring together. But again, the actual story is, I think, really obvious and really kind of bland and boring and stupid, in my opinion. It's just very much like the haves and have-nots. But then with the have-nots, the like poor people on the ship who I guess somehow are emigrating or like lucked their way on the ship, I'm not really clear. Like they must have had some money just to get a ticket, but I guess they sold their life savings or whatever. But anyway, with the have-nots, I feel like their portrayal is very not racist, I guess, but like very stereotypical and very like not that pleasant, I guess. It doesn't seem very fair to the people of that era or humans in general. I mean, I guess you get away with it because it's all like what we would consider white people now, but it's a lot of broad stereotypes about the Irish and about Italian people and stuff like that. But then Jack himself is just like seems very like Midwestern or whatever, like very bland, vanilla type person. And I will say, like, obviously, I think the big success for this movie was, I think, the audiences of teenage girls who kept going again and again, for that, let's just say it, the hint of sex or whatever, like titillation, this teen heartthrob, whatever. And we'll just say anyone who was attracted to either of these two characters and their actors. And I will say, I really do enjoy Kate Winslet and a lot of her other roles, and same with Leonardo DiCaprio. I think he has kind of a weird chip on his shoulder about his acting or something like that. But I think he's a perfectly good actor, though I don't really like his portrayal in this movie. And I think he was obviously cast mainly because of his success in Romeo plus Juliet. He's essentially doing the same thing, like a star-crossed lovers thing. It's very much the exact same story over again. But I will say I don't really like his portrayal in this movie because he's supposed to be playing this like world-weary, hardened artist, explorer, adventurer, whatever. He's just been traveling the world, seeing everything. But I feel like he can't really pull that off. So I felt like you either needed an older actor or maybe an actor who could actually portray that a little bit better. As far as I know, Leo doesn't have any artistic capabilities. I'm pretty sure when they have the close-ups, some of that is actually James Cameron himself. And then I assume they have an actual artist on set. And I will say, I mean, this is a weird gripe to have, but I don't feel like the art they show is all that good. It's just strange when we have, like, Rose, going on and on about how amazing his art is, and you're like, it's just some sketches. I don't know. It's okay. But I guess it's kind of a weird gripe to have. The art could have looked like whatever. It could have looked like anything. I will say one thing I did like this time through is I noticed that a lot of, I guess, the referencing art that really was lost in the Titanic. So they've recreated a bunch of presumably lost art that's, submerged beneath the sea. So yeah, again, another big problem I have with this film, by the way, is that it's very poorly paced, in my opinion. Like, we have 2.5 hours of all this setup and exposition and bland romance and drama, again, just in my opinion. And then, like, the last 40 minutes is where the ship breaks apart and all that stuff. And then you have, like, a long postscript as well of, like, people slowly freezing to death in the sea, and then some get rescued, and then, filling in the backstory again with the old lady. So yeah, it's just a lot of, in my opinion, again, just very boring, very rote, very, like, it's like the most generic thing you could possibly write. And I feel like Cameron's heart probably isn't in that much. I think he is interested in doing this, like, class dynamic stuff, because you have these same stuff bubbling up in Terminator and some of his other movies. The have and have-nots stuff. And he does have, like, some really good actors, and none of them are bad. Like, they're all doing really good performances. I will say David Warner is a little over the top as, like, the main villain's sidekick, who's, like, a former cop or something like that. And then, of course, Billy Zane is way over the top as well. But in kind of a good way, I would say he's probably like the most entertaining part of the movie, and maybe one of my most favorite parts of the movie. We'll say you also have a really amazing score by James Horner, I believe, who I think has passed since then. I may have gotten that wrong, but hopefully not. But anyway, I think he was one of the best composers of that era as well. And I think he did really good work in this. That is slightly ruined, in my opinion, by that horrible Celine Dion "My Heart Will Go On" song. And again, obviously that song is super popular, so I might just be speaking for myself here, but I can't stand that song personally. The words over the actual music. The actual music itself is pretty good and haunting and all that stuff you want and romantic and whatever. But essentially, we have a plot here where Rose is trapped in her class and then in the expectations of her horrible mother and the other people around her, and, the implications that they got trapped in their bad marriages as well. But she is currently set to marry Billy Zane, who she obviously doesn't love or care for at all. He's very domineering, misogynistic, and constantly telling her what to do and cutting her down and wearing a terrible hairpiece. And people are also wearing a lot of really good outfits in this movie, like either sailor outfits or, tuxedos and fancy boarding room outfits and all that stuff. Um, anyway, then she eventually meets this guy, Jack, who, forget, I think they either meet on the deck beforehand or, no. They meet when she's, like, about to commit suicide, essentially. She's about to hurl herself into the sea. Which at various points, by the way, Feroz had gone through with different actions. Jack probably would have made it. I'll point out the other one because he probably could have gotten on that door that saved Rose. But anyway, so she's about to kill herself. He's like, "Why are you going to do that?" And talks her out of it. So this whole like big dramatic thing. And again, another big problem I have with this movie, it's like super melodramatic, and I think the tone's just like swinging for the fences or like playing to the crowd or whatever the hell the expressions are. It just doesn't seem very serious to me, or like we're supposed to be taking it all that seriously. A woman killing herself because she's about to be locked into a horrible life is pretty serious, but it's not played that way. So then, she tracks him down the next day and is like, "I want to thank you," but then she doesn't like his class boorishness or whatever, or at least that's the facade she's putting on, because obviously she is attracted to him, from the start. But eventually he wins her over because he's so worldly and he's a big artist. And I will say these two actors do have a lot of chemistry. They're not bad together. I just think the characters they're playing are kind of silly and don't really fit them that well. And Kate Winslet is, she's not using her actual accent, which is impressive, particularly because she was quite young when she made this movie. So yeah, they bond over his artistry and his clear like humanism and passion for people. He likes observing things. He likes his French prostitutes or whatever, and drawing random other people on the deck. So yeah, it's just that like artist appeal, the bohemian thing, that she thinks is better than whatever thing she's gonna get locked into. Um, and then I think he's teaching her how to spit or something like that, and that's when her mother and all the upper class women discover them. Um, and Kathy Bates is quite good in this as well, although her character doesn't really get all that much to do. But what she does get to do is very nice and kind of reminded me of like Edith Wharton novels. Just like the person who's so powerful or rich or whatever that she's kind of above it all and doesn't have to like worry about like I don't know, stepping beyond her station or whatever thing. So she clearly ingratiates herself with Jack, Kathy Bates, and actually gets him a tux to wear to sort of come and be greeted by the rest of the upper class people. So that's when he puts on his like super fancy outfits, and everyone's like, ooh la la, or whatever. And that's when he first gets mistaken for actually being rich, and then eventually the mother's like, "Oh, how do you like the steerage class or whatever?" and brings him back down. And then they have like a dialogue tete-a-tete or whatever, where he's like defending his life and saying, I think there's more to life than all this crap. And I've had some taste of the fancy stuff, like he's not faced by caviar and all that. So it's like, I get it, it's not for me, I don't care. Which again, Rose loves. Uh, so yeah, it's a lot of just like banal sort of people sitting around and talking scenes, which can be good, obviously. Look at Ian Forster or whatever. But in this case, I think it's just so generic and doesn't really say anything about anything, really. Like rich people are evil or bad or what have you. Like, shocker, I don't know. It seems like pretty obvious, both then and now. And this obviously before the I think it's before the big market crash. I think this is like 1900s or something, 1910s. Um, so yeah, then we have a series of escapades where eventually Rose wants. I think in between that, Jack takes her to the lower decks, and they have that like big. Again, I think very stereotypical representation of the immigrants down there, having a dance party and whatever, and drinking and having fun and smoking and all that. And she like lets herself loose, lets her hair down, so to speak, and does a little dance as well. I think it's one of the most mocked scenes in this movie, probably. I think for good reason. But whatever, it's fine. It's just them like letting loose. And again, I think again that Kate Winslet and Leo are doing serviceable acting, and the direction is good. It's just that the dialogue is pretty bad, and then the things they're actually doing are kind of stupid. Um, so then I think at some point, there's more of like Billy Zane being arch and snarky at Leo, and then eventually there's the big scene where she's like, I want you to draw me like one of your French girls," which is the famous. So, she's pretty naked throughout that scene. And actually, I think I had probably underplayed it whenever I had seen it originally, because she does get pretty naked. Like she's shot from behind, without any clothes, and then you basically get the reveal when she takes her robe off. Like it cuts right before she completely takes the robe off, but then you get a lot of boobage. Sorry, just making a joke. I don't know how else to say it, but just like her boob is in frame for like a pretty big chunk of time, which is kind of shocking considering this movie is rated PG-13. Like I don't really know any other director who kind of gets that allowances as James Cameron does. Even for like Avatar, like I know they're CGI, but the Na'vi are pretty naked as well. They have like a little strand of hair covering their chest, and then like a thong or whatever on their butts. Um, but anyway, so that's supposed to be super romantic and amazing, and then they have their big love scene. Again, David Warner's like trying to chase them, trying to track them down and get them in trouble at the request of Billy Zane. But they manage to get away, and then they sneak into an old-fashioned car, and they fog up the glass. And again, I think this is a scene that probably a bunch of teenagers really enjoyed, of her hand just like streaking across the fogged up glass, and then them just like lying there post-coital. Like, there's no surprise to anyone in the audience, like what just happened. Like they just had sex for the first time, presumably her for the very first time. I think that's the implication, at least. I think Jack is probably supposed to be more worldly than that and more experienced. But yeah, I think the implication is that it's her first time. Um, so then that's basically the end of that whole story, except for several more contrivances. Because essentially, as soon as they exit in their, post-coital ecstasy or whatever, they distract the night guards from watching the sea as they should be. That's when they hit the big iceberg. They say, "Oh, look at the lovebirds," and then they look up and there's a big sheet of ice. I did appreciate at the very beginning of the movie, in the circling story, one of the science people shows them a recreation of what happened, so it's kind of priming you. It's also maybe, the effects in that are so cheesy that then when you see the CGI of the era later in the movie, you're like primed to think it looks a lot better. But anyway, it also helps you, picture what's going to happen for the rest of the movie. And I did like there was a little detail in the dialogue where he said basically this science guy who's like wearing a Watchman shirt for some reason. Anyway, he says if they had just like hit the ice head on, they probably would have just gone through it just fine. But because they like tried to turn and they couldn't really turn very well in this giant steamship, that's where all the like compartments got slashed, and that's what ultimately brought down the Titanic. But anyway, so then there's a lot of fluff, and there's some like nice class commentary here too, because even though like it's obviously starting to flood, there's water in pretty much every compartment. They're still like trying to pretend so people don't panic. So they're like inviting people to the like sitting room to drink more bourbon and eat more caviar and all this, and like we'll make you some tea or whatever. The servants are still like running around attending to everybody for some reason. And meanwhile, Rose is like pretty aware that something really bad has happened, and Jack kind of confirms that. And she has kind of a friendship with the guy who designed the ship, I think. Who's I forget the actor's name, but he played the dad in Alias. He's a really good actor as well, doing like an Irish accent in this one. And anyway, he kind of confirms the worst, which is that the ship is going to go down. And in between all this, Billy Zane has discovered the drawing, and it basically insinuates that Jack has stolen the heart of the diamond, the heart of the ocean diamond, to try to get him into trouble. So again, there's more contrivances here. Some more class commentary where Rose is like basically exploding at her mother, being like, "You're not taking this seriously enough. You think this is just a joke, but the ship is about to go down." But again, this is where the human drama starts to get silly when you're like, okay, this is a giant disaster happening. Why did we even need this love story? Like, couldn't we have just started here? That would have been my preference, at least. I don't really see what the love story has to do with anything. Like, make a separate movie about a love story on a cruiser ship, if you want to make that. Like, what is the point of it here? It's just stupid, in my opinion. But anyway, so that's when all the disaster stuff starts happening, and I think for me, again, it's the strongest part. And I think the reason for that is a lot of this is stuff that survivors actually recounted later on, because a fair amount of people did survive this big tragedy, and then later wrote books and wrote their own accounts of what had happened that night. So I think Cameron cribbed liberally from everybody's summaries of that, and that's what he peppers in throughout the rest of the film, which again makes it feel like more realistic, more inviting, more exciting, all this stuff. And yeah, I think that's when the movie really comes to life. I'm not here for this terrible love story again. Not to disparage Leo and Kate. I think they've both been really good in other films like Eternal Sunshine and all those Scorsese films that Leo did. But I'm just not for it here. So yeah, there's more contrivances, and this is where I think it's just really silly because literally the ship is coming down, it's coming to pieces. People are like running around. There's this big thing apparently about like the women and children have to get off first. So I guess a bunch of men just died and didn't even have a chance to get on the safety boats. Um, and there was this kind of funny detail, which is like they keep calling the life preservers the life vests. They called them life belts back then. I'm not really sure why. Maybe because you cinch them around your belt. I have no idea. But anyway, Billy Zane has locked Leo cruelly in the like compartment on the bottom. That's the thing that the audience is supposed to really care about. So Kate Winslet has to run around back and forth when she discovers what happened and try to save him. And meanwhile, a bunch of characters keep like buying their way onto a rescue ship and then like leaving. This is really frustrating to me personally. Like Billy Zane gets safe passage for him and her, but then she like runs off, and then he has to like chase after too because he's so jealous. He's so jealous he has to murder them right now, so we can have dramatic scenes of him running around with a gun trying to shoot them. Um, there's this whole contrived thing again where like she gets an axe so she can try to free Jack. And he's like, take some practice swings, and she like completely botches that. And then he's like, okay, just go for it. And then she like closes her eyes as she's swinging an axe and trying not to not decapitate, but kind of try to cut off someone's hands. So that was really silly. Like I'm pretty sure if you were in that situation, you wouldn't literally close your eyes as you were doing the thing that you need to really concentrate on. But whatever, she does it. Um, and then they're just like running around in the dark in all these like starting to submerge compartments. And also in between this, again, this is some of the coolest stuff is where they keep like cutting to what the actual crew is doing. So all the like mechanics and stuff. And a lot of it's really messed up too. Like they just keep like locking off compartments, so a bunch of people just die immediately because they have to close off the compartments like in a submarine or whatever. Um, yeah, all that stuff is really well done, and I assume it's all a mixture of models and practical, props and CGI stuff. Probably when none of that stuff would work. The entire ship itself is CGI, and it looks really good. Again, I think Cameron has a really good handle on how and when to implement CGI and how and when to use practical stuff and models. It mixes it all really well together. Like you're not going to see a bunch of CGI people running around until like they start falling or whatever. But until then, it's basically they film people for real, and then they like kind of comp them into the like overall canvas. And I think a lot of people just weren't that careful or considerate about how to use CGI and different mixtures of effects back then, or even now. Like a lot of it's still pretty rough. I would say the Avatar movies are still like some of the best use of CGI and best overall looking CGI still. So that stuff's all great. So then there's more contrivances. Again, Billy Zane again barters for Rose to get on one of the escaped ships, but she sees that he's gonna like do something bad to Leo, so she leaps off at the last second. And this is the second time where if she just gotten on the boat and like left, as she should have, then Leo probably would have survived some other way, or, like gotten away from the bad guys, because like what do they care if he dies some other way? Um, but she doesn't. She has to leap off, and I really hate that. She's like, you basically killed Jack there the first time, and then the second time on the door later on. So then they have to run around again. They're like trapped in some other compartment, and they like have locked the underclass in for some bizarre reason. I guess just to me mean. And the different crew members keep threatening people with guns. Again, I think just to like add some salaciousness or some like action. So it's just a lot of Rose and Jack running around, and Jack saying "Rose, Rose" like 50, 100 times, and cursing at the crew members as they keep like failing to help them and dropping keys and like I don't know, just being pretty incompetent overall. Like clearly they didn't expect anything like this to happen. The best part is again Billy Zane has bribed some guy to like let him on the boat, and then he like runs off to go try to shoot Leo and maybe Rose. I don't know who he's really aiming for, to be honest. But that's like the best scenes is like Billy Zane just grabs the gun from David Warner and he's like running down the hall as it's flooding and he's like shooting at them, and it's like, is this just for the trailer? Like I think the same thing happened in Moulin Rouge, where they have like a scene in the trailer where Richard Roxburgh is like running down the theater with a gun like he's gonna shoot everybody. It's like you really just did this to make it seem like at some point somebody gets shot, didn't you? But nobody does. He's like a terrible shot, fortunately. And he says, "I hope you enjoy your time together, what little you have left, or whatever." And then there's a great thing where he's like, face smash or whatever, because he says to David Warner, "I just realized that I put the stupid diamond in the coat that I put on Rose, so she has the diamond in her pocket." Which it's lucky she never threw the jacket off or something. Like it's lucky that the diamond I guess survived all that time, even though she never does anything with it. But anyway, so at that point, it's just about survival, and Billy Zane finds a little girl and is like, "Please, I have a child," and it's all I have left, and they let him on one of the boats. But then this really weird thing happened that I don't think I've noticed any time I've watched this before. Like, it's not enough to like just bring him to that point and then just like whatever he like gets off on a boat. They have to have the boat capsize or something, and it's all very chaotic the way they film it, so you're not exactly sure what happens. But like it seems like the boat gets tangled, or maybe the other immigrants are like somehow messing with the ropes or something. But the point is, like, pretty much everybody in the boat falls out, and then Billy Zane's like crawling on top of it with some of the other crew members, and he's like, you can see him like using an oar to try to push people off and be like, get off, because he really has to have the boat for himself. I don't know. It's very strange. I really don't know why they needed that particular note. Like, it's enough. He's already a villain. You don't have to keep like, he doesn't have to literally like personally kill people or doom them to die in the freezing depths. Oh, and then a little bit before this, because I was kind of joking, I was like, I don't remember what happens to Fabrizio. Like, does he survive? This is Jack's friend from the beginning of the movie that he barely interacts with all that much throughout the rest. Like, they do the first, like, big, I'm the king of the world thing, and then him and Rose recreate it later on. I don't like that scene either. But the effect is good, I suppose, since that's probably all just green screen. But anyway, he gets it worst of all. Like literally, he's like in the water. He's like failed to get on one of the boats, or like he's cutting the rope or something. And you like look up, and one of the smokestacks falls over and crushes like everybody under it, and like right on Fabrizio. It's like that seems pretty brutal to poor Fabrizio. Like what did he do? He was just like a loyal friend the whole time. But obviously they're showing that like anyone can go at any time. And we had to like get some drama for like whoever we have left. David Warner happens to be standing right when the boat cracks, so he like falls over or whatever. Um, and that is probably the coolest part is when the boat like literally cracks, and then like half of it's like starting to go like that and just like go upright. Though I did find it a little ridiculous. So first this like cook that kind of looks like Mario saves Rose from falling, and then like later they end up on top of the thing because somehow she and Jack run all the way up, even though a bunch of people are like just falling over and slipping and sliding. And then they get on the other side where the fence is, and they're just holding on for dear life. And she like looks over, and the same guy is there again. It's like, okay, so you just want to like, have a few characters that we recognize, I guess, to go through the rest of this fate, this dark fate. But it's just all very silly. Although maybe again it's based on people's actually reminiscences. They're like, oh yeah, I remember that there's this guy who helped me, and then later I saw him on there. And there's this whole thing with this band that just keeps playing and refuses to stop. Though it seems like they wouldn't have made it onto any of these boats because they were just apparently evacuating women and children. They also do this whole thing throughout with the ship captain, who's played by Bernard Shaw, who played Theoden King in the Lord of the Rings movies, and he's actually really good. But basically, at the beginning of the movie, they set it up like him and another of the chief engineers or whatever. I forget the actor, but he's in the Mummy movies and Jumanji. He's always playing like a stern dad type. And anyway, they're discussing the ship, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we don't have enough safety boats in case something bad happens." But why would something bad happen? So basically, they messed up this whole thing. If they could have just had like some more safety boats, so they go slightly slower. I don't know. I don't know why that was a big problem. Seems like a pretty easy fix. But it's not like they had inflatables back then. They had to have like literal wooden boats. Um, so yeah, all the rest of that is now the boat's gone, and Rose and Jack like have to hold hands as they're sinking so they don't let go. But then they pop back up. She has a life preserver. He doesn't. As they go back up, they're kind of separated for a second. Some guy comes over and is like pushing her head down because I guess he's panicking. She has a life preserver and he's trying to save himself. I don't really know. They surely had enough life preservers. I don't know, or life belts. I don't know why that part was a big problem. So anyway, Jack has to come over and like knocks him out, like decks him. And is like, okay, so that guy's just dead, I guess. Cool. And also throughout this, you see a bunch of CGI people falling past the ship and like falling into propellers and stuff. And again, that spectacle would be very cool if it wasn't like real things that happened. I mean, I doubt it happened like that. Probably people were like, oh yeah, everyone just jumped over immediately or like tried to save themselves. I don't know. I doubt they were like falling and dramatically doing disaster movie stuff. But anyway, so then it's pretty much the end of the movie, and they're like slowly dying in the Arctic seas or wherever they are. I think they're actually near Newfoundland or something like that. Like they're actually pretty close to America, which is maybe the saddest part of the whole thing. Like they almost made it. But anyway, which also begs the question: why weren't there more ships around to like help rescue them? I don't know. I think it's eventually like the Lithuania or something like that. Lithuania. Um, so anyway, they're in the middle of the ocean, and Jack happens to have this door that nobody else has noticed. And I'm like, okay, why weren't they pulling off doors and whatever else floats from the ship the whole time? I'm like planning this a lot better, so more people could have survived. Who knows? Or just like taking axes and hacking off pieces of the boat that would float. It just seems like a lot more people could have been doing stuff like that instead of just like running around and pretending nothing was happening. So anyway, there's the whole big sad dramatic thing where it's like, oops, our weight's too much for the boat. We can't both survive this whole thing. So Jack heroically says, you have to go on, and we'll never let go, and all this stuff. It looks very cold, and I bet the actors were very cold. And that's another kind of problem I have with this movie, and maybe James Cameron in general, is that he doesn't seem to protect his actors very well. Like I think Kate Winslet and probably Leo had like not like life-changing injuries, but definitely very serious injuries like chipping bones and stuff like that. And I hear the Abyss was even worse, like people almost drowning because they weren't using as many safety precautions. Maybe they did just go out into the ocean instead of going into like a Hollywood studio water stage or whatever. So yeah, then they have to say their dramatic goodbyes, and she lets go of his hand immediately as he's dying, and he like floats down. Um, and then they're just like slowly shivering in the dark, and then eventually a ship does come and rescues them all. And there's a big final thing where she like is on the dock and she sees Billy Zane and she sees her mother, and she has the chance to like go over to them, but she doesn't. So she just kind of like disappears into New York, having learned all these like great new values, and then she's gonna like use her life in a more bohemian way, which you kind of saw at the beginning of the movie. Like obviously she had a kid, even a grandkid. I don't know who that adult woman is supposed to be. That she's with. But anyway, she clearly hasn't lived out this like posh, like horrible life that she didn't want to begin with. And Billy Zane probably committed suicide during the stock market crash or something. That's not really funny, but I bet it is what would have happened to this character. And you could see the sequel to all this in Revolutionary Road, where these two actors reconnected to show how horrible their relationship would have been. Obviously, that's a super different plot and not really related at all. It's just kind of funny that they went out of their way to make that. So that would be the end of the movie, except then we flash back forward to the future, and we have this whole thing with like, so I guess I don't know what happened to the Heart of the Diamond, and they all have a big laugh, and he's like, oh, that's a big shame. And then late at night, she like goes back out to stand, kind of how she was on the Titanic, and she like, whoops, drops the drops the diamond to the sea. And that's the last we see of it, and that's the last of this movie. And she presumably dies in her sleep, because then the next thing we know, she's like imagining being back on the Titanic, and Jack is there, and everyone she loves, and everyone who died throughout the movie is there, smiling beatifically at her. So I guess the implication is that she, told her story and then immediately croaked, and now she's like in heaven with all her friends, as we sweetly hear Celine Dion playing us out. So yeah, again, even in describing the plot of the story, you can clearly see kind of some of the biases and problems I have with the movie. Again, it's beautifully shot, beautifully lit. Like, obviously, the crew and stuff were impeccable behind the scenes. I heard this weird story where somebody apparently dosed some of the clam chowder or something with, I forget, PCP or something. I don't know. I heard that story once. I'm not sure if it's true or not. But maybe they just got sick or something. Um, so yeah, obviously this was a very difficult shoot, and it's just impressive it was made at all in 1997. Like, it probably isn't any movie from that era that's this like that holds up this well and has this scope and epic use of effects and music and all this overpowering emotion. But my whole problem is, if you're going to sink in all those resources, just make sure you have a story that's actually worth telling. Like, you're drawing from all these people's reminiscences, why not find an actual love story? I think some of this might have been a remake of a previous Titanic movie. I don't know. I've never seen it. Probably will never will based on this one. But I guess that movie also had I think it was called A Night to Remember or something like that. And it also had like a contrived, forced, made up love story. And I guess it has a good message overall, the story, but it's just like, why insert that where like this movie didn't need that at all? I guess Cameron's just like, I guess smartly being like, you need some sort of human component. You can't just like show the ship fall apart. And all these other disaster movies do it too. Like, you always have leads, and you always have like people you're following, and survivors trying to like get through it. I think Poseidon Adventure might do it better, honestly. So yeah, it's obviously a very popular movie. It made a ton of money. It won all the Oscars. Gave Cameron all this clout. It kind of launched Leo and Winslet into the stratosphere in terms of their career. They didn't really have to. They could just choose what they wanted to do. They didn't have to like do things for money anymore. And it also, pushed the state of the craft effects, priced people's interest in going to the Titanic submersibles a little too far. Um, so yeah, I do have positive things I have said and continue to think about this movie. But even at the time, I was just like, remember being in the audience and being like, huh, okay, that was weird. Had some cool effects, but otherwise, I don't really see what the big deal was. Um, yeah, I wasn't a big fan when it came out. I'm still not that big a fan. I think the framework, like the actual film, is a film. It's like a competently well made film, but like the actual story they're telling is deeply stupid to me, and I don't like it at all. So anyway, I'm sure a lot of people do like it. I'm sure a lot of that is nostalgia, or like who you were, where you were, or how you were feeling at the time. I don't have any of those connections. I saw it at the time, did not like it. Every subsequent time, I think it's too long, and I think it takes way too long to get to the like juicy meat of the story, and then a lot of it's just like running around, like acting like you're on drugs or something. I don't know. I'm not a big fan. I probably like Romeo plus Juliet a little bit better, to be honest. I mean, that's not saying anything because Shakespeare, but obviously it's Baz Luhrmann, and his style is a little bit grating sometimes. So yeah, I mean, I would definitely say see this movie and just have your own opinion about it. And if you like it, great. I'm not trying to detract from anyone, but my personal opinion is I can't really stand it, and I don't see what's good about the actual story, like the effects, the spectacle, all the disaster stuff. Okay, that's pretty good, but again, not that respectful to actual history and actual people's families and lives that were lost. But it is nice that they incorporated so much, period detail and so many actual stories and people's like actual rememberings of what happened. You can compare it to like Saving Private Ryan or something, where it's like kind of putting together a compilation of like actual history. So from that aspect, it's good, and like the actual effects are like really good. But I don't find the love story compelling or well made. Even though again, I think Cameron does actually do romance really well, and their chemistry is palpable. I'm not sure if they dated or not, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. Okay, so for this episode of Positive Takes, sorry, I have some other channels, so I kind of got confused. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and subscribe and like and follow for more content.